I'm here with Sideshow at a sad time, I think, for the Overwatch League. I'm certainly speaking for myself that it looks like you guys won't be continuing to work the broadcast. I think you've left a stamp on the scene and really shaped the way the community interacts in a positive manner, in a self-deprecating manner, but also in one where the butt of the joke is never too serious and doesn't really ever cause anyone to have a sour taste in the mouth. I think you resonated a lot with an audience to an unbelievable degree, which we will get to, but I guess a lot of people at this point are concerned about your guys' future and whether or not you are financially secured going into 2022, because after all, you have a wedding coming up, right?
That's true. Yeah, I do have a wedding coming up, but we've decided to go pretty chill on that anyway, so we're not going to be doing something splashy. And I mean, weddings are absolutely unbelievable. If you have a huge wedding and you invite all of your family to it and everything, and for example, if I was trying to pay for flights from people from the UK over here or something, that would be outrageous. But for non-financial reasons, we've decided to have a very small wedding anyway. But either way it's sliced. No, we're not going to be, or at least I'm not going to be in any kind of financial difficulty for this upcoming year or for the near future. I won't speak for Bren, but I imagine he's in a similar position as well. Because we've put in the work to try and diversify our revenue streams as well. We're not just Overwatch League casters. We also stream and we do YouTube content, and we have our company, Platchat, that we co-own with a couple of other people that also brings in some revenue for us as well. And we have been working, I've been working Valorant stuff for the last 2 years as well. So we have other things certainly that we can go into. And even if you just axed the owl salary completely, I'd still be able to live comfortably. It's just that I would like to still continue doing broadcast work because I enjoy it a lot.
One interesting aspect of this is like you switched positions on the broadcast, right? Like you were initially desk talent and then you guys became full-time casters. When was that decision made?
Well, I have done a ton of different roles in broadcasting before I worked for the Overwatch League. Not in a TV studio in the same way that it was for Blizzard Arena, but I've done a range of different stuff. I mean, when I started trying to do full-time esports work, I was doing written work, interviews, writing up news, that kind of stuff. And then some YouTube kind of interviews or analysis pieces on the side of that. Before that, when I was working in TF2, I'd primarily done casting. We didn't really have analyst desks because there weren't any LAN events that were big enough to justify it. You just had the casters fill in between the breaks. So it wasn't my first time doing casting when we moved into that live commentary role. But the reasons that we decided to go into it were, as with everything, there's multiple reasons why you make these kind of decisions. As there's multiple reasons that I made this decision this year as well. But part of it was that we felt that the casting would provide us a different challenge to be able to do in Overwatch. We'd already done 2 years of the desk. Part of it was that the Overwatch League at the time didn't really feel like it had a good idea of what it wanted to do with the desk. And I think the desk only became something that really found its niche, its place in after things went fully remote in 2020. So after the homestands, I mean, the homestand desks, if you can remember that, were an absolute disaster. Those were horrendous, not because of the talent that was involved. I'm not talking trash about them, but just the production that was involved and like their idea of what they want to do with it throwing back and forth was really messy. But once things went remote and you had that leaning into the fact that everything's a little scuffed, that aspect that really pulled some entertainment out of the format of the desk. And I think they've tweaked it over time to where you've got a really nice product there. But when we were working on it, it felt strange and kind of like they'd taken the traditional sports model and then forced it in. I think Bren would speak much better to this as well, but he was never natural desk talent. He really had to figure out what his voice was. When he started, he was trying to emulate other people that he'd seen on the desk, people like Monty or people like, I mean, at the time, like Thorin was one of the most well-known desk talents that you had across all the esports, with like fiery one-liners and super edgy comments and that kind of stuff, and like really trying to go for some dry analysis at times too. And that was what I think he had in his head, was like what you had to do on the desk. And then over time, over the years, we realized it's way better to be more loosey-goosey with it. And we kind of demonstrated that when we did the World Cup desks, and we had much more control over the flow of things. And we found a format that we really enjoyed working on. But there were multiple reasons involved in that kind of stuff for why we wanted to go into casting in 2020. And we felt like we could get back to our roots and do something incredibly well. For me personally, I think one of the biggest things that I enjoy about doing live broadcasting is that you have time to properly talk about analytical stuff that you would never talk about on the desk. If there's a unique moment or unique interplay between two different people or multiple different people, or like a cool set play, you can see that, you can see it setting up, you can tell the audience to pay attention to it, and then when it happens, you can feel the reward from that. You can also do that while co-streaming, which is what I love about co-streaming. When you're on the desk, you don't have the time to be able to do that. You have to pick kind of the overarching narrative or one cool play, something like that. You can't walk people through it on a beat by beat kind of level. And that's what I really enjoy doing. I like desk work as well, don't get me wrong, but that's what I wanted from that swap into casting. And I think it's been pretty rewarding over the last 2 years.
You talk to the scuffedness of the desk. I think eventually that actually sort of became a feature that really endeared you towards a lot of the audience. Just like it felt like a lot of the stuff was improvised, or just like really vibing with who you're working with. And it felt like that vibe eventually also made your way into content. Even like you had, for instance, Foreheads for a while, where you continued the energy you had with Golden Boy at the time, but then also onto Platchat. So did you realize this is something people have a hunger for and wanted to serve that, like creating Platchat?
Yes, I think especially after we started Platchat after we'd done the World Cup desk for the first time. But I'm not exactly sure about the timeline, but I think that's what it was. And so we started with this nugget of an idea that we want to, well, myself and Bren and Jonathan had been kind of talking. We lived together for the whole of 2018 as well. And then myself and Jonathan lived together for 2019. And we frequently talk about stuff on the desk and how we wanted things to work and what we thought were the best ways of being able to get the best out of us. Obviously, we don't make those decisions when it actually comes to the job itself, but we were kind of talking internally about what we would like to see from it. And then we'd occasionally pitch ideas to the people that did make those decisions. But having had those kind of conversations, we then were talking to Matt about it, Matt Morello, and he was like, well, let's make a podcast. We'll call it Platchat. It's a funny, self-deprecating term about how the casters aren't actually good at the game, but watch enough that they can be entertaining and talk about it at a fairly high analytical level. And so he really kicked our asses into getting it up and getting it started. And we had this nugget of an idea. The first few episodes were horrendous, which is why, you should never really trust people that are successful. There's a huge amount of luck involved in all of this and like iterating. But the phrase is, the perfect is the enemy of the good. You should never try and get something perfect. You should just throw something that you think is all right out there and then iterate on it until it's good. And then it's great. And then maybe you can try to shoot towards perfection, though you'll never really get it there. And so, yeah, just over the course of making all of those videos, whether it be personal streams or whether it be the Platchat stuff or Foreheads or whatever, you're always throwing something out and seeing whether it resonates with a certain audience. And it seemed like the Overwatch audience really enjoyed the looser, less edgy, not as analytical, but in a sense where they don't want you to be like roasting someone for some terrible play and like this guy needs to be cut, etc., etc. It's more along the lines of showcasing something cool that they might have missed in the broadcast. That's like something that really resonated with the Overwatch audience, or pointing out a set play that they might not have missed, or something that they weren't able to witness before there was a replay viewer in the game. You know, those kind of videos really captured people. And then also just the organic kind of discussion among friends that we would have whenever the people at Overwatch League went out to have some drinks after the show, or whenever we were sat in the green room or whatever. Those kind of discussions that we would have about the game, like who's the best flex support of all time, or whether this team's playing this strategy well, or is this composition a good idea? Those kind of discussions that you're just having, and you're fired up about them, and you're talking about them, and you're not really trying to debate in a serious manner, but you're just kind of throwing ideas out there and discussing it. That kind of stuff really seemed to resonate as well, which is why we wanted to do that. And kind of the goal of Platchat was to try and take that idea and make it more free flowing. We don't really need to have points scripted out and a host directing one person to talk and then the other person. It's a group of people who are friends and have been since 2018, since that group of all-star talent plus myself and Bren got together and were able to work day in, day out with each other and develop that rapport and that dynamic where we can just talk over the top of each other and shit talk each other, and it's fine because you're friends.
Right. Now, I mean, you guys are enjoying also great amounts of success. You could argue, like, from the esports perspective, you guys are definitely, if in Overwatch, you are the biggest content creators in terms of like professional, dedicated, top tier content, I would say, in terms of the podcast side of things. And then also certainly competing or being there with the co-streams. But you also have done that again and replicated that success in Valorant, right? So you mentioned in your personal stream that you want to further expand that. Are you just going to intensify that? Or are you going to spread out into different games, into different esports? Or is not even esports the framework that Platchat should only necessarily be thought about?
Well, it's a very small company, so we're able to pivot into whatever we like to. We don't have to stay stuck to some kind of guidelines that we've set for ourselves at the very beginning of the year. You know, we haven't like allocated a budget and allocated a roadmap, and we have to follow it no matter what. We're pretty agile because there's only a few people involved. But having said that, there's definitely some things that we're really looking to focus on for this year coming up. We were able to replicate the success going into Valorant. I think that was a massive question for us. Is what we do only good for an Overwatch audience, or can we do this for other esports, other games, other things as well? And by being able to pick up other really good talent involved in Valorant, people like Wyatt, who we already had very good, a very long friendship with already, and has worked in like TF2 in a broadcast manner, and is just naturally a charismatic guy too. And then Bala, who we got in because we realized he was an incredible talent who was on the come up in Valorant. We were able to snag him early. And Mimi, who we've been working with a little bit as well. Again, same kind of story. Clearly on a path towards being a great broadcast talent, but we're able to snag them early and get them involved because it's a fun show and people enjoy being on it. So I think at this point we've proven that we can take the formula and replicate it in another game. Whether we want to do that again starts to be a question of whether it's whether we have the personnel to be able to do it. Like, it's a small company, so if we wanted to branch out into Halo or Fortnite or whatever the game would be, we'd have to think about whether we want to bring in new producers, maybe, because our current producer would already be working 2 of the previous shows, that kind of stuff, or whether we want to bring in new talent. And that's something we're always considering, but I don't think that's at the forefront. At the forefront of Platchat for 2022 is trying to capitalize on our current position within Overwatch and Valorant. We have, like you said, the biggest podcast in Overwatch. It gets really good viewership compared for how large the scene actually is. And in theory, this year should be the release of Overwatch 2, right? Right, guys? It's going to be 2022, right? So if it is this year, then we want to be accelerating content as it's released by the developers. So as the developers talk about, some upcoming developer update, here's a new change that's going to be added to Overwatch 2, then we'll continue our Overwatch 2 series that we had to postpone for a while, and then ramp up content, involve people from content creation, like people with YouTube channels around Overwatch, people who are really into the lore, people who are really into PvE, people who are really into the PvP side, that kind of thing. And then maybe do some co-streaming as well. We haven't really discussed it. I saw people, talking about, it's going to be awesome to get them co-streaming. And then they're like, oh, well, what about Avast though as well? He does stuff with Platchat, but he also does his own co-streams. We'll just figure something out. We don't have a plan at the moment, but we'll figure something out that people are happy with internally, and then try and make it as good as possible for the viewers. And then on the Valorant side, our co-streams are doing extremely well. I think we offer something that nobody else really does, with the fact that we are broadcast talent that also understand the streaming aspect too. That crossover is extremely small. So you can't really go to most streamers who do co-streaming and to ask them to do a live interview on the main channel or do a desk segment or something like that. Whereas we can, that would be very simple for us. So I think that puts us in a great position. We're also just really heavily ingrained with the community and enjoy talking and playing the game. So those are the major focuses for us in Platchat. And I think there's a lot of growth potential within the company as well, because people enjoy what we're doing right now.
You mentioned that you guys would probably have to scale up. I was always interested and also kind of intrigued, because you personally seem to be doing so much VOD grinding into as to actually have like a clue about the analytical side, right? Is 2 esports the hard cap that one human can physically stay on top of?
2 esports is so difficult. Okay, I will be incredibly skeptical in the future of anyone who claims to be an expert in more than 2 esports, because they are either, I don't know, they've either got like a Wizard Hyung system of 5 people who are just feeding you data via a mind link, or they don't understand what they're actually watching in at least one of those esports. I found 2 to be very difficult to stay on top of, and it ate up a huge portion of my time. But I also do like to go very in depth on things too. Like I watch a huge amount. I feel like it's not enough to just watch the good games or like the big matchups. You also have to watch how, let's say for example, Dallas v Shock or something, or Dallas, Shock. Dallas Shanghai. In order to understand the Dallas Shanghai rivalry from 2021, it's not just enough to watch Dallas versus Shanghai. You'd also have to watch Dallas against their NA competition and Shanghai versus their APAC competition, and look at how they play and how they beat up on the lower teams and how they play to be able to get into those positions, that kind of stuff. At least in my opinion, that's what you have to do to get a thorough understanding of it. And I always start to feel really weird if I miss out parts of my prep. I've been a very heavy relier on preparation breeding confidence for the whole of my broadcast career. And so if I start to miss out that prep work, I feel less confident about the assertions that I'm making, and that just detracts from how I'm presenting myself. So I don't personally think I'm going to be involved in more than 2 esports unless it's in a much more casual manner. Like, for example, being the host of Platchat Overwatch, whilst also being very deep into Valorant and very deep into, I don't know, Halo or something, right? Like, I think I could feasibly pull that off, or I could do desk and casting for Overwatch and Valorant whilst also doing interviewing for for Fortnite or something. You know, the roles in which you can ease off the analytical knowledge a little bit allow you to grow a wider and wider esports base with which to work with, which is how people like Pocket and Golden Boy, who are fantastic in many different games, are able to get to where they are, I think, because they understand when to lean on people that have expert knowledge of the games. They understand how to get up to speed quickly, and they understand how to make their role work with less in-depth knowledge.
Right. currently, when you're looking at the current esports market, I mean, the similarities between Valorant and Overwatch are there. Then it stands to reason to think like maybe you guys are primarily FPS oriented and maybe even enjoy the hero abilities. Are there other esports that you would look into, and would they necessarily have to be up and coming esports, or would you ever entertain, for instance, dipping your toes in League of Legends, let's say?
Well, when I was trying to get into esports as a full-time profession in 2016, I thought to myself, I watched a huge amount of content from everybody that was in a position of authority at the time within esports. Anyone that had a job that was willing to give out advice, interviews, anything like that. And what I realized was it is going to be incredibly difficult to penetrate a scene that already has people established within it. That is going to be a task that is not worth your time trying to expend there. So I think it's way easier to ride the wave of a game that's on the beginning, because the barrier to entry for knowledge is so much lower. If I'm trying to get into League of Legends or Counter-Strike, games that have massive, just decades of history, you have to start learning so much to be able to get up to speed with even the most basic fan that only knows a little bit about the teams and the players' history. You would have to do so much research to get up to scratch there. So that seems extremely unlikely. Now, could I get up to scratch to be able to do interviewing, for example, with a game like Counter-Strike that I've followed casually for a while? Would I be able to get up to that kind of speed to be able to do an interviewing job? Yes, I think so. But in terms of desk work or casting, no, I don't think it would be worth my time to even try, actually, even though I enjoy watching the game from a casual perspective. I think that's just a reality for most, or maybe people don't realize it, but I think it is a truth that simply is not worth your time trying to penetrate those kind of games. In terms of other games, though, I'm down to do a lot of different stuff. I love the idea of having a skill set that's as wide as possible. I do find some value in going deep on certain things, like perfecting your craft in a certain area. I do enjoy that to some degree. But what really gets me going is having a wide skill set, is knowing I can do this to a very competent level, and I can also do these 10 other things to a very competent level. That's what I enjoy personally, rather than the depth and perfection of the craft. And one of the things that I feel very confident about now, having gone from TF2 to Overwatch to learning Valorant as well to a really high level, is that I think I have the framework now to be able to pick up any game. So any new release or any pre-existing game as well. For example, something that I've previously looked into as well is like the chess streams. You know, the like Pog Champs and stuff like that, and the Twitch rivals do chess streams and stuff like that. I'm a very casual chess player, a very bad chess player as well, but in the role of I am your host and alongside me is your expert, I think I'd be able to tackle that if, I was given a while to be able to get up to speed on it. So I'm really excited to have an opportunity to just dive into a bunch of different stuff and challenge myself and really put that to the test. Can I just learn a game if I give myself a few months to be able to do so? Because I have been able to with Overwatch and Valorant. There is very, very little crossover. People think there is, but there is almost zero crossover when it comes to like the way that TF2 and Overwatch and Valorant are actually played at a pro level. The concepts that you have to think about are drastically different. There's actually much more similarity between Valorant or CS or like a tactical FPS and poker than there is between Overwatch and Valorant. That there are way more similar things. That's actually something that I've been, again, getting into recently too, is that aspect. And it's been able to cross-pollinate some ideas back into Valorant analysis.
Right. Now, of course, we also want to talk about what brought about the situation that currently everyone is talking about, the topical occurrence that you guys just couldn't find an agreement at this time with the Overwatch League. And we kind of want to talk about the aspects that one has to consider in the negotiation, what determines the price of that. And one thing that stands out is like you seem to be valuing the diversity of your tasks a lot. And therefore, the freelance sort of approach and the profile of Platchat as a company has pretty much those attributes, right? So one would think it would probably therefore be hard to enter negotiations and then be restricted with exclusivity clauses. Were those like exclusionary for you? Were you always going to demand the ability to work other scenes, for instance, even their professional broadcasts? Or was that something that you didn't value as strongly?
In any negotiation system, you're going to want as the broadcast talent non-exclusivity. Everyone would want that because it doesn't help you at all to be exclusive to a title. It's something that the developer would want, and different developers value it to varying degrees. So it's unreasonable to think that broadcast talent should always have non-exclusivity all the time. It's the same as just thinking you should get paid as much as you want all the time. That kind of logic. There has to be a balance and equilibrium between what you think you're worth and what the developer thinks you're worth, or any employer thinks you're worth as well. And if a tournament organizer is going to request exclusivity from you, then in almost all situations, they're going to be paying for it, probably via compensation, although I suppose it could be via other means as well. So no, exclusivity was not a deal killer in that sense. It wasn't going to stop the process at all. But it's certainly something that I would take into consideration, right? Because I want to be doing other things. Even last year in 2021, I was able to work some Valorant events in the off season. I was able to appear on the main broadcast for Riot when we were doing NALCQ. And that event gets filed along with MSI MGA with events that were so shit they never even happened. But at the same time, if it had occurred, then that would have been perfectly fine in my contract to continue doing that. And that's also the one that Uber said that he was going to be working and then ended up not being able to, which I'm not going to speculate as to why that was, but for me, I was able to work that event, and that was perfectly fine in the off season for me to go and do that because it's something that I had brought up at the beginning of 2021 and had worked into my contract. But I've had various amounts of exclusivity over the years, just depending on whether or not it was important to me, whether or not I had leverage to be able to negotiate that kind of stuff as well. I don't think Overwatch League have been predatory about their exclusivity at all. It's just that it's a valuable thing to have for certain tournament organizers is exclusivity of their top level talent. I think for 2022, obviously, with wanting to work that breadth of, when I value career breadth, exclusivity becomes something that I value, or non-exclusivity becomes something that I value quite heavily. But that just means that it gets the equilibrium gets shifted to somewhere else.
Right. Now, another aspect that you said you considered when evaluating this year is, of course, the scandal around Blizzard in 2021, and the the problematic handling also afterwards. I think you sat down on stream and went through various reports of mainstream media articles regarding that. And it felt like, at least to some people in the comment sections, sort of like this situation where you could have already at that point decided that was maybe either going to be a deal breaker or it was going to be the thing that makes you guys not come back. Was there just like the thing like, I'm a freelancer, I can talk about this, and if I was not going to be extended another contract based on me talking about a very serious topic, then so be it?
In some sense, yeah. I think I think the issue is so important that it transcends your duties of professionalism to the company that you work for, right? When something is that important, you should talk about it. And it's more important to use your platform to discuss that and have people be aware of it than it is to keep stum out of respect for the people above you or whatever. So that didn't even, I wasn't trying to be deliberately inflammatory. And I don't think that I particularly was, actually. I personally think that I was, that I brought a reasonable level of criticism towards Activision Blizzard and Bobby Kotick as well, in terms of the article that was talking about his penned letter that he added Francis Townsend's name to the end of and was his response officially, that kind of stuff. But at the same time, if a company decides to let you go for talking about that kind of stuff, that isn't a company you would want to work for, or at least that's how I feel about things. And to be clear, I'm not saying that there's any of that was related to it. As far as I'm aware, that had nothing to do with the reason that I'm not going to be working for Overwatch League in 2022. So that's the only reason that I bring that up is because it was a serious consideration, and I think it should be a serious consideration for anyone who works at a company like that as to whether or not you want to continue working at a company like that. When these kind of allegations come to light, and the extremely serious investigations as well by different regulatory bodies, you should think to yourself, okay, where do I draw the line? What are my guiding principles as to whether or not I continue working at this company? And so I'm not saying that was the deciding factor, because I don't think it was, and I think that would be too grandstanding of me to say that was the case. But it's a consideration for sure, especially, as I've said, when it comes to 2022 and you're potentially working as the marketing spokesman for a new major release. You know, that's an important thing to think about.
Does the acquisition or impending acquisition of Activision Blizzard by Microsoft and the very likely ejection, like if you look at the usually how these situations go about, what 3/4 of the upper level management will probably be exchanged in the next, I would say, 2 to 3 years. Those probably were the ones most responsible, of course, given their position of power. Does this change anything for you and how you view this situation, given that change is likely about to happen?
That wasn't something that I was aware of when we were talking about it. I mean, you got to remember that this was something that even though we're only talking about it now, this is essentially something that's been, there haven't been any changes in this process since early December. So it's not like we waited for the Microsoft situation and then we were like, "Oh, fuck it, we're out." But it's just that it broke down in early December, and we were given the strong impression that they considered that to be it for our negotiation period heading into 2022, and they were making their own plans to adjust without us involved, and we would have to do the same. And so we waited some period of time to see, okay, is that just them playing hardball? No? Okay, no, they're actually, all right, we need to start thinking about what we're doing for 2022 then, which is why this has now been the case as I returned back to the US, because my brain is now in work mode instead of vacation mode when I was, going back to the UK with my fiance and getting engaged and that kind of stuff. So, yeah, sorry, what was the original question there, Yiska?
If you think differently of the situation now that the Microsoft acquisition will likely...
Oh, of course, the Microsoft acquisition. Yeah, no, it didn't really factor in. I mean, I have no idea how that will trickle down. I think in a lot of cases, these kind of things are so far above the pay grade of the Overwatch League. Overwatch League is a tiny part of the Overwatch ecosystem, and then the Overwatch ecosystem is a tiny part of the Activision or the Blizzard ecosystem, and then Blizzard is a smaller part of the wider Activision Blizzard ecosystem, and then all of that has now been bought by Microsoft. So I don't know to what degree these things will trickle down or change the culture or anything like that. And like I said, I'm not going to claim that I'm some valiant, principled guy that left because it all got too sour for me or anything. It was just one thing to think about whilst making this decision.
Right. Now, of course, it seems increasingly hard to make these decisions with sound moral reasoning given the situation. I mean, Riot certainly had a very similar scandal in the past. It looks like even other esports under, like the recent acquisition of ESL and Faceit will have their fair share of moral considerations to be made. Does it therefore feel more clean, I suppose, to be working rather as a third party and be serving the scenes where you primarily engage with the community and really just the game, and not to be working within companies that theoretically have some taint about them?
If your principles and your ethics were your driving force to work in, or rather, were your driving force and you also worked in esports, then I think you would be obliged to work in some kind of third-party capacity, because there's almost nowhere that you can escape companies that have some moral issues. But even then, you're not in a perfect environment. You're probably working on Twitch and funneling money towards Jeff Bezos at the end of it. So it's not a scenario where you can be idealistic, I think, with your principles. Particularly, I think the wider conversation, especially with the ESL and Faceit acquisition, is how much of the gaming and tech areas are getting bought up by Chinese and Saudi money. There's an enormous amount of ownership from those two countries, and what they do domestically, you would not want to see replicated in the online space or your gaming space or your companies that you've previously enjoyed their content or how they work or any of that kind of stuff. Not that it usually does. It's not like it suddenly does a 180 and you start seeing these horrendous cultural issues, but it's worrying, it's concerning, and I think it goes beyond just, is it bad for the CSGO scene or is it bad for individuals? It is a concerning thing overall, but I think the focus should be on what you can do yourself. Is there something that you can change? And you probably can't change whether or not the Chinese or Saudi governments decide to invest in your favorite game developer. You can't probably change that, but you maybe can change stuff like the Neom and Blast deal and the LEC and the Neom deal, that kind of stuff, where if you put effective pressure on those people, then perhaps that sponsorship would end up being dropped, because it's not life or death for the company. It's some extra dollars coming in, and you make it clear that you're not happy with what's happening there. Those are the kind of areas where you actually can feasibly, realistically, pragmatically make a difference. And so I think there are different considerations to be made in those instances versus the ones where it feels almost impossible to have an individual impact on what's occurring. But like I've said, I don't consider myself to be somebody who is driven primarily via their ethics. That sounds like a horrible sentence to say out loud, but I am not. I have certain things that I care extremely deeply about ethically, but I don't live my day to day refusing to buy things that are like clothing and technology and all of these kind of things that are made in horrible work environments overseas. It's something perhaps I should care about, and we all should care about much more, but I don't. I'd be lying if I said that I live my life in that manner. And so it doesn't extend to my work in that kind of way as well. I think there is a limit on how much you can care about everything. And I have certain things that I care a lot about. We do a lot of, Bren in particular actually is incredibly good at being able to push causes that he cares about and like try to schedule. He's constantly messaging me trying to get regular monthly charity streams for this cause and that kind of thing. I think he's extremely good about that and keeping it at the forefront of his mind and always trying to use his platform to enact some change in that manner. And I try to speak up when it's at the forefront of my mind as well. But for everybody, I think it's a case of trying to do better stuff. But I would be lying if I said that I was driven primarily by that kind of guiding force.
Right. Now, of course, we're sort of nearing the end of the interview, and I think it's only responsible to our audience to create some hopium, I suppose, for people following you in Overwatch. So let's say hypothetically, right? We see Overwatch 2 launch, whatever that means to you. Is that the pre-patch that theoretically could already be launching or is launching with the Overwatch League? What if that already starts like really revitalizing the game? Maybe it only comes with Overwatch 2, or it's like a 1-2 step where there's definitive improvement to be seen. You see the long-term trajectory of this game going upwards. You have fun with the game again. Do you think you will have to reevaluate how you see everything? Also, given that you seem to be not just monetarily driven, but also just like by how much enjoyment you can derive from the tasks and the environments that you're in?
I think it's a question of whether or not you can try to predict the future and see how successful a game could be in. Obviously, that is something that you should be considering. If you're involved in a career and your employer or the genre of work in which you work in is likely to grow hugely within the next few years, 5 years, whatever it is, then perhaps it would be better to stay in there right now, even if it was for a worse work environment or less compensation or whatever it was. It might be better to stay in there because the rewards 3-5 years from now might be insane. It might be massive. But that relies on you being confident that that would be the case. And that's not just a specific thing to esports. That would apply to any employment situation, right? But it's especially useful in esports because you have these rapid accelerations from a game that you can get into with very little effort on the ground floor. And suddenly a year, 2 years from then, they are some of the household staples in terms of games that people are watching, the viewership's through the roof. I mean, if you think about the trajectory that Valorant's been on, that's absolutely the case. For Overwatch as well, at the beginning, you had people like ZP and Hex who, weren't prior broadcast talent at all, but got in at the ground floor, managed to get a thing with Ghosty Gamers going, and suddenly they are, at least within the Overwatch scene, household names for people who like to watch Overwatch. So in that sense, it comes down to whether or not you feel like you can get on and off at the right periods of time. I mean, I think back to Dora and Monty, and that was one of the reasons that they decided to get on board with Overwatch League in 2018. And I mean, they were on board way earlier than that as well. When they were first coming up with the idea of Overwatch League, they had Dora and Monty on board. And the reason that one of the reasons that they had talked about is because they felt at the time like esports had about a 10-year survival period and League of Legends was reaching the end. There was a bit of a dip, I think around like 2015. And they thought, okay, this is probably the beginning of the decline of the game and we'll try and shift so that we maintain relevancy and a great career path for the future. And looking back on it, that wasn't correct. League of Legends is still the biggest game and in fact has increased its lead over everybody else. But that doesn't make it a stupid assessment to have made in that situation. It was still a pretty reasonable punt to have made at the time. And so, of course, if Overwatch 2 absolutely explodes, which it does have some potential to be able to do, the IP is extremely attractive to a huge amount of people. It captured audiences and minds when it was first released in 2016. So if they were able to do everything perfectly and it all worked out fantastically, then yeah, we've probably missed an opportunity at being up there with let's assume that Mitch and Matt continue and remain the number one casting duo in Overwatch. They might be the number one casting duo in esports or something if Overwatch 2 went crazy. But at the same time, you have to think about percentage chances of that likelihood occurring. And I think Overwatch has made some strange decisions. And even though the Overwatch League has done excellent jobs at being able to improve tone, improve formats, all of that kind of stuff, And I'm sure for 2022, with the world opening up a little, well, I mean, perhaps that's a bit too optimistic of me, but maybe with 2022, the world opening up a little bit, maybe we can get back to having more live events as well. You never know. So even with all of that trending in the right direction, they're still shackled to Overwatch, the wider ecosystem, and whether or not they push the marketing well, and whether or not there is that open beta, and whether or not people are attracted to it, whether or not people are soured because of the Activision Blizzard culture within there, and all of the things that have been exposed that have been happening over the last decade and a half. So those kind of things all get factored into a decision of whether or not it's a good career move to make these kind of pivots. But I think you have to, if you're working in esports, you have to stay flexible enough to try.
Right. Now, another potential source or way you could stay as connected as you would have been with the broadcast talent is, for instance, to not just continue the co-streams, but keep the frequency pretty high. And then potentially, I think it generally makes the co-streaming experience better, even though there have been very smart people developing great solutions towards the issue of not having clean feeds for the co-streams in Overwatch, right? Do you think that is something that Platchat would consider, would level up the quality or the experience of the co-stream? Do you think that is at all likely to happen?
I really don't know. I mean, I think it would have to be a fairly significant change in mentality from the people at Overwatch League, because, well, maybe not significant change in mentality, because originally when I started doing co-streaming in 2019 at the beginning, there was no clean feed available, and I didn't even think to ask, honestly, because it was not a thing that was done in esports. They didn't just randomly give out a clean feed to people who wanted to do co-streaming. So I created a system where you could keep track with what I was watching whilst also just having my stream open at the same time. And that worked. It was fine. Since then, the other scenes, Fortnite, Valorant in particular, have taken co-streaming and made it much easier for people to do it. They've given out clean feeds. They have ways of being able to track the co-streaming statistics and bring them into the tournament organizers' hands to be able to sell to sponsors, that kind of thing. And Overwatch League has done that with their partnered teams as well. There have been co-streams. I mean, we've run co-streams for the Play Overwatch channel when we've had Overwatch developers on there, and those have been on the Platchat couch. They haven't been branded as Platchat co-streams, but we've done them for the Play Overwatch channel because we've had devs on, and that was part of, a paid side content thing that we did for the league. And also different teams. I can't exactly remember which teams, but I remember like Houston and Dallas and Florida and those kind of teams doing various different co-streams, maybe for like a big game. This is the game that gets us into the main melee or whatever. They'll do a co-stream with somebody, normally one of the streamers that they have doing the co-streaming for it as well. And they have the game on there as well. They have the clean feed, or they have a caster feed or something like that. Whether or not Overwatch League will take that extra step and give them out to disinterested parties, whether they'll give that out to people who are not direct partners with them, so to people like Platchat, to people like Avast, to people like myself, I'm not sure. I mean, that would be a next step. I would argue it's the next logical step and mirrors what people like Riot have been doing with Valorant, but they might disagree for a range of different reasons. There might be legal reasons. There might, it might be limited to only YouTube rather than Twitch, which might turn off certain content creators. All of those kind of things have to be taken into account. If that was an option, though, then it comes down to whether or not it's worth your time to do it. Is that more lucrative to co-stream a regular season game than it is for me to be streaming something else instead? Would I get more viewership? Would I enjoy it more? Would I be providing content that's actually interesting? How much do I want to do that? Do I only want to do it for stage finals? There's so many different things to consider there too. One of the reasons that it's a good thing in Valorant is because it gets good viewership. People are interested in the games. I mean, Valorant viewership is way higher than Overwatch viewership, generally speaking. It's probably It's not quite in the realm of. I mean, where is it? It's probably 3 to 4 times higher, I think. Maybe that wouldn't be reasonable, but it's somewhere around there.
No, that's right, yeah.
I think it becomes sticky when you try to consider the Chinese audience as well for Overwatch League, because then the numbers become much closer. Obviously, they're not the same, but it becomes closer when you consider that. But considering that's not an audience that I can ever tap into because I don't speak Mandarin I can't, or Cantonese, I just can't. I can't engage with that audience, particularly because of the language barrier. It almost becomes pointless for me to consider that aspect of it. So in terms of the English-speaking audience, it's massively more lucrative for us to do Valorant co-streaming if we can convert the same percentage of the pie. But then, you get to the question, could we convert a larger percentage of the pie for Overwatch, considering we're more well-known in the scene? Yeah, maybe. So it'll be something that we try out, I'm sure. It's just fun to do, so why not?
If I wanted to be cheeky, I could maybe make the prediction that the Platchat co-stream could maybe rival the mainstream views. Do you think that would cause an issue for the main broadcast?
I don't think that would be true, for starters. I don't think it could. I think that the highest I've ever seen for Overwatch was something like 5K viewers on the co-stream. I could be wrong with that, but like an individual person having 5,000 compared to something like 100,000 on the main broadcast, which is 1/20th. Maybe it's got a lot closer without me realizing, because I'm not keeping track of I mean, at the moment, it would be primarily a vast viewership. But I think if everything, even if it went as well as it possibly could, you're only trying to capture, a fifth of the audience would be unbelievable kinds of viewership to be able to get in as an individual. So I don't think it's likely that it would take a significant portion of the pie. And even if it did, that's the kind of thing where you are selling against that audience potentially. It could even be selling against it twice, because in theory, they could have both streams up. I don't know why you would, but I guess in theory you could. And it tends to just get more viewers involved. It doesn't, as long as you're still showing the sponsorship material on the co-stream and the people who are doing the co-streaming aren't ruining your sponsor relationships, then it only adds value to your marketing anyway. So to me, it's a no-brainer. I think co-streaming is just an excellent new addition to the way that esports is being consumed. But it does tend to ruffle some feathers, both on the tournament organizer and on the broadcast talent side.
Sure. No, I wouldn't undersell your particular draw. I will also say the co-streams in Valorant have repeatedly had more concurrent viewership for some of the content creators during VCT, I think.
I'm not Shroud. I'm not. Yeah, I'm not Shroud. I'm not Ninja. That's not feasible, I think, within the Overwatch system. Maybe if you had some kind of like, I don't even know. Maybe if you had Tim the Tapman came back and he's co-streaming an Overwatch League regular season game, so the main broadcast doesn't actually have that many viewers because it's just a regular season game, but then Tim the Tapman's like co-streaming and everyone's like, holy shit, maybe in that kind of situation you get that impact, but it doesn't normally happen when the viewership Venn diagram is nearly a circle. For those kind of situations where you get that comparable viewership by co-streamers and the main broadcast, it's because the Venn diagram is pretty split. They're bringing in a whole wave of new viewers that are just interested in what they can bring as well. For us, we're very much we're very in depth with whatever audience we're trying to. The main broadcast is appealing to a similar audience, I think, a lot of the time as we're appealing to. We're not pulling in a range of people that are following us as personalities. We're pulling in a range of people who are interested in watching anyway, but they want this alternative approach.
Sure, even though I guess eventually you could make the case that given your already pretty significant size in Valorant, it can't just all be guys that followed you from Overwatch over, right? So there would be...
No, I don't think it is almost at all. I think it's mostly, the Valorant viewers that have just discovered us. That's what I'm saying. I don't think that we are bringing over a large amount of outside viewers to the equation. We're just allowing. We're more. I would say what Platchat does really well is if you're wondering whether or not to tune in, and you see that we're doing it, you will tune in.
Yes.
So you're converting a lot of those 50% viewers into 100% viewers instead of the 0% into 30%, 50%, whatever it is. So, you never have, you very rarely have a viewer who watches every single game. You do, certainly people do, but that's not the case for every viewer. They don't, if you're a viewer of the Overwatch League, you don't religiously tune in every single day. But you can try and increase the frequency that people tune in by offering them different options like these co-streams, like what Platchat does. And I think that's what we do really well. It's not capturing a new audience, it's retention of current audience. And that's something I think that is also key. You can't just be always trying to capture new people.
Right. Now, of course, we hope you will continue to capture more audience going into the future, especially with hopefully some exciting news. There's theoretically a new or a business call, I think, scheduled for Tuesday, where we might find out a little bit about what Blizzard is planning. Otherwise, I think I speak for a lot of people saying thank you, what you've so far done for Overwatch. Thank you for the stuff you will do in the future, and thank you for the interview.
Thank you very much.